Misha nichnas Adar marbin besimcha. The Talmud famously says that when the Hebrew month of Adar comes, the month in which there's the holiday of Purim, we're supposed to start being more joyous, more happy. What does that mean? What do you mean you're supposed to start being more happy? How do you command someone to be more happy? What does it mean to be happy is really the question. And why is Purim the holiday on which we're happy? What is Purim? What is this crazy story? And what are the costumes? And why is Purim supposed to be the holiday that epitomizes happiness or that most emphasizes happiness? So again, what is Purim? What is the relationship between Purim and happiness? But really I want to know what is happiness. And what is happiness on Purim? And why is the happiness on Purim different than the happiness that's not on Purim? Okay, let's dive in. It says in the Yerushalmi, in the Talmud, that's not the classic one we learned, the Babylonian Talmud, but the Talmud that was from Israel. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Hanivi'im ve'aktuvin atidin libatel v'chameshet sifrei kodesh einan atin libatel. In the future, right, the Torah, the Bible is made up of three parts. Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, the 5 books of Moses, the prophets, and the writings. In the future, the prophets and the writings will be no more. All that we'll have is the 5 books of the Torah. When the Messiah comes, B'atid Lavo, in the future, we'll just have the 5 books of the Torah and no longer have Nevi'im and Ketuvim, no longer have prophets and writings. Oh, but then comes Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Reish Lakish, and he says, Af Megillat Esther v'alachot einan atin libatel. Also the halachas, but for all purposes of our conversation, also Megillat Esther, the book we read on Purim, that will not cease to be. Meaning, in the future, what will be our canon? 6 books, the 5 books of Moses, and the Megillat Esther. Why? What is so important about Megillat Esther? Let's see the same thing that the Midrash says in a different place from a different angle. Kol hamoadin betelim. All of the holidays in the future will be no more. We don't need all these holidays. All of reality is going to change. V'yemei Purim lo yu betelim. But Purim will not cease to be. In the future, the one holiday is Purim. Why? What is so significant about Purim? And we have 2 sources here that are talking about the supremacy of Purim. One is talking about the text, the story of Purim, and one is talking about the holiday. Right? One is saying that the story of Purim is more significant than all of the other parts of Tanakh, which are not the 5 books of Moses. And the other one is saying it's more important than all the holidays. What's the difference between emphasizing the text and the holiday? I'm not going to go there, but they're both being shown to be supreme. So now I want to understand, what is so special about Purim? Why is Purim the highest in some sense? And it's clear that it has to do with Simcha. If we look at the 9th chapter of Megillat Esther, which is more or less when the story ends, and the last 2 chapters, for all intents and purposes, turn towards us, the reader. Mordechai and Esther, they say, make this a holiday for the future and do such and such. And what do they say? That after each day, after the war, at the end of the story, there were days of mishteh v'simcha. There were days of festive meals and happiness. 3 times, 3 psukim in a row. Psukim Yud Zayin through Yatet, chapter 9, 17 through 19, when it's finishing up the story, it says that they had days of happiness and parties, and feasts, that's the right word, happiness and feasts. And then it continues, as maybe we'll see later, therefore we too shall have a day of happiness and feasting. So why are these days of happiness? Right? It's not that crazy, right? They just won some type of war. They thought they were going to die. They didn't die. They're happy. But there seems to be an emphasis. Pasuk after pasuk after pasuk emphasize that it's happy. That emphasizes the happiness. And then frankly, when it becomes a holiday, the whole thing operates around happiness. So much so that we say, Misha nichnas Adar bar misimcha. Happiness becomes the focal point. Why is happiness the focal point? What is happiness? And what is it about the Megillah story that reveals in some sense what happiness is? And why every time that it says simcha, does it say mishteh? Every time it mentions happiness, does it also mention the feast? Okay. I want to try to address this question by going a bit far away and making our way back. Let's go to Masechet Brachot, the tractate of Brachot. Start with the Mishnayot. The 5th Mishnah of the 9th chapter of Brachot says, Chayav Adam levarech al ra'ah kishem shevarech al tova. One of quite possibly the craziest lines in all of the oral Torah. A person must bless upon the bad just as they bless upon the good. I'll quickly finish. Shene'emar, and the source text is the Shema. V'haftat Hashem Elokecha, and love Hashem your God, b'chol levavecha, with all of your heart, b'chol nafshecha, with all of your soul, b'chol meodecha, and with all of your something. So the Mishnah continues, and I'm not getting into all of it, but one way to understand b'chol meodecha will be all that is measured to you. Right, so no matter what is measured to you, be thankful. Okay, so now that we saw the proof text, let's go back to the claim. What do you mean chayav adam levarech al ra'ah kishem shevarech al tov? What does it mean I'm supposed to bless on the bad and the good? Or bless on the bad like I bless on the good? What do you mean? Something bad happens in my life and I'm supposed to react the same way I'm supposed to react as when something good happens? Like, what would that even mean? It's a nice idea, maybe, as we sit around textbooks and think abstractly. But in life, something terrible happens, and I don't want to bring examples. You're supposed to react in the same way that you react when something great happens? What could that possibly mean? It must mean something deeper. And I want to look at the Gemara on that Mishnah. Chayav adam levarech. The Gemara quotes the Mishnah. My question exactly, the intensity. What do you mean? Literally. What does it mean one is obligated to recite a blessing for the bad just as for the good? Like what? The Gemara screams back at the Mishnah, like, what do you mean I'm supposed to bless for the bad, like I'm supposed to bless for the good? They're bad and there's good, and I have different reactions because I'm human, because there's bad and there's good. I can't have the same reaction. Okay, now the currency by which the Gemara asks the question is it poses a challenge by an earlier Mishnah. I just read you the 5th Mishnah of the 9th chapter of Brachot. Now let's look at the 3rd Mishnah. The 3rd Mishnah said, at the end, Al besarot tovot omer baruch hatov v'meitiv v'al shmot ra'ot omer baruch dayan ha'emet. When you hear good tithings, you say, blessed be the one who is good and who does good. And when you hear bad tithings, you say, blessed be the true judge. There's a lot to analyze, like what do you mean Baruch? What is blessed is the good who does good, and blessed the true judge, and why do we say the judge, and why do we say the good? But all we need to point out now is that the 3rd Mishnah said there are different reactions when there are different blessings to say when you hear good news and when you hear bad news. But hold on, the 5th Mishnah told me that I'm supposed to bless on the bad like I bless on the good. So which is it? So the Gemara's question, and honestly, anybody who read the Mishnahs in order should have asked the same question. Mishnah 3 told me when good things happen, say blessing X, and when bad things happen, say blessing Y. And then Mishnah 5 told me bless on the good the same as you bless on the bad. Bless on the bad the same as you bless on the good. They're one and the same. So which is it, screams the Gemara. Gemara, in its response to Mishnah 5, a person has to bless for the bad like they bless for the good. The Gemara screams back, what do you mean bless for the bad like I bless for the good? You told me to say a different blessing for the bad and for the good. So in the Gemara, in its beautiful classical way, makes a distinction. What does it mean, bless on the bad like you bless on the good? Amarava, lo nitzracha ela lekabulinu besimcha. It means to receive them both with happiness. To receive the bad tithings with happiness the way you receive the good tithings with happiness. So the Gemara sort of creates a distinction where it can exist on 2 parallel planes. We acknowledge that there is good and that there is bad and that they are different because I have different blessings to say. But I'm supposed to react happily. Okay, great job, Gemara. You resolved some textual contradiction. But it's even crazier now. It would have been easier for me if you said the opposite. It would have been easier for me if you said be happy when good happens and be sad when sad happens, but say the same words. How is the resolution? Okay, you're right, say different words, but be happy when they both happen. The Gemara resolved the question, but it made it an even more challenging question. And I want to propose that maybe if we come to understand what this means, it's the secret of Purim. What is happiness? And in what sense is happiness a way that you can react both to the good and to the bad? The Gemara continues. Mikra. How do we know this? How do we know to react to the bad the way we react to the good? How do we know we're supposed to react to both of them happily? There are a number of answers that I can't get into now, unfortunately, because of time. But I'll at least point a few things out. What does it mean, levarech? Different opinions. It means to sing about what happens in the same way, or to praise in the same way, or to call out to God in the same way. All of these are what the happiness is that I'm blessing the similar way. Are good and bad chesed versus mishpat, passion that doesn't adhere to the law or a strict adherence to the law? Is it two different names of God, Hashem, which is a certain aspect of God, which is all-encompassing, or is it Elokim? Is the good and the bad, kos yeshuat Hashem, my salvation, versus my pain? Those are three of the opinions. But I want to focus on the fifth opinion. I'm skipping the fourth one for now. The fifth opinion, Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav Mishum Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says, V'chentan Mishmei Rabbi Akiva, and also Rabbi Akiva said it. Le'olam yehei adam ragil lomar, kol de'avid rachmana letav avid. Train yourself to say everything that God does for the best that God did it. Everything that the merciful one did, everything that the merciful one did, he did it for the best. Okay. So sometimes something happens that I call good, and sometimes something happens that I call bad. And the third Mishnah gives me the right to relate to them differently and call them good versus bad. There is good and bad, at least in my subjective perception. But train yourself to say, but whether I think it's good or I think it's bad, they're both for the good. That's what it would mean to receive happily. And let's just pull out a couple other characters who say something similar. And maybe we can think about how they are similar, but not exactly the same. In Masechet Taanit, there's a famous story of Nachum Ish Gamzu. Famous story of a man whose name was Nachum Ish Gamzu. Nachum, the man of also this. And the Gemara asks, why was that his name? Dechol milta dehavesalkele, amar Gamzu letova. That no matter what happened to him, he said, also this is for good. And then it tells a totally crazy story where he was given jewels from the Jewish community to take to the king, and on his way, he was robbed, and there was dirt put inside it, and he said, also this is for good, and he gets to the king, and the king says, what are you doing bringing me dirt? And then Eliyahu Navi comes and says, no, it's magical dirt, and then it is magic, and then this is the dirt that Avram Avinu always used to win wars with, so then the king takes it and wins wars and puts back dirt. It's a whole story, but every stage of the way he says, also this is for good, also this is for good. Right, so what's the difference? I can't go into it, but what is the difference between Kol Da'avid Rachman Letavid, everything that the compassionate one does, he does for good, and also this will be good? At least one thing I want to point out is the presence of the Lamed in both of them. They don't say also this is good, they say also this is for good. Also this will be good. Which would then be interesting to compare to the 18th century philosopher Voltaire in his book Candide. There's a character named Pangloss who seems to be a representation of Leibniz, and Pangloss says, he's expelled, he's almost hung, he gets a disease, and he always says, all is for the best in the best of all possible worlds. All is for the best. They're all saying the same thing. Okay. Everything I've said until now is not really about Purim. So we're going to have to get back to Purim. But it's about happiness. And some reason happiness is about Purim. So I just want to sort of show, let's read one more source first. Rav Adin Steinsaltz writes about happiness. And he says, what does it mean that it says Yismechu Hashamayim? What does it mean when we say that the heavens are happy? What does it mean for the heavens to be happy? I'm going to read inside a few lines. What is the happiness of the heavens? I believe that the happiness of the heavens has to do with the fact that happiness is not about telling jokes. It's not about verbose celebrations, but it's the opposite. True happiness can be quiet and internal. The core of happiness is a person feeling b'shlemut, complete, at peaceness, because the word for completion is shalem, shalom. First, feeling at peace with what is. This feeling of completeness is what happens when one is happy. Happiness is about things being how they are supposed to be and where they are supposed to be. When a person is able to feel they are not lacking anything, that is happiness. When things are done from this place of at peaceness, then you have a happiness that aligns with this. The heavens are happy. The heavens appear pure and complete, and therefore they are happy. When a person is happy, that means a person feels complete and at peace with themselves, with their world, with all the matters of their day, with what they do. Happiness is that I can stand opposite things and accept them with a feeling of there's nothing lacking. I accept what is, I am happy. And then Rav Steinsaltz quotes our Mishnah and Gemara from Brachot. A person can live their lives happily, and they can live their lives not happily. And that is why it says that it's not a matter of if things are good or bad. And that is why it is written that a person must bless on the bad as they bless on the good. And this expression is quite weird, because we already have a blessing for the bad. But the Gemara says he's supposed to accept it happily. I can have a headache or a stomach ache, but I accept the situation as it is. I am able to accept all things happily. It is not that there are no problems in the world. The question is how to accept reality as it is. And then it is possible that a person will be happy all of their days. Rav Steinsaltz says, I think, a beautiful encapsulation of what the Gemara says. How does the Gemara resolve the contradiction between the third and fifth Mishnah? I think of it as two planes, as I alluded to before. There is an acknowledgement that I experience something as good or bad. And the happiness is not about a smile. Happiness is about accepting it, even if I deem it good or bad. Not saying it's good, it's saying it's ultimately for good. Right? I'm not being told to relate to everything with a smile. Right? If you remember when I said the Gemara, I thought that it would have been easier to say the same blessing, but let me feel how I feel. Right? It would have been easier to say, I think. You can be happy when something that you think is good happens, and be sad when you think something sad happens, but in all cases, say the same blessing, showing that you don't know. But it's not. It's something very deep and profound. It's saying your subjective interpretation, your moral clarity, your moral compass, is that or isn't that subjective? I'm saying two different things, but interesting how they may be connected. The way you deem things good or bad is of tremendous value. Call it good and call it bad, but it's on your emotional reaction that's deep that you need to work. You can have your immediate happiness and say Baruch Hatov V'Meitiv, and you can have your immediate sadness and say Baruch Dayan HaEmet. Have your reaction. Your reaction is allowed to be real. There is good and there is bad, but underneath it, can you know that there is a bigger story being told and you don't know the story, and you don't know if the thing that's now good may end up being bad, and things may flood, may end up being bad, may end up being good. Now we're starting to get to Purim, but not Foch, everything turned upside down. But there's some notion that happiness is an accepting of what is. So there's good and there's bad, but there's happiness underneath both. I can know it's good or I can know it's bad. I can feel a smile. I can feel a frown. But can I have a deep, profound, when I look at God in the eyes at the end of the day, or 3 times a day, or every moment of every day, and accept it? That's happiness. Okay. I think this has to do with every day of the year. It is a goal we're meant to try to inhabit in our entirety of our existence. We are meant to not deny that there's good and bad in the world, and not deny that we experience some things happily and sadly, but have some profound happiness that aligns with the tranquility of the heavens. So to this point, some ideas about happiness that grew out of Masechet Brachot. But now let's look at Purim. Why is Purim somehow the epitome of that? Why is Purim all about the happiness? If there's the good, the bad, and the happiness that transcends, why is Purim bringing our attention down here? Amar Rava. Rava says, A person is obligated to become intoxicated on Purim until they do not know the difference between cursed be Haman and blessed be Mordechai. Something about Mishteh, about a feast, and the intoxication or inebriation that comes with it, maybe by wine, maybe by water, each person will figure it out, but there's something about the notion of this feast that mixes up what's good and bad. There was the happiness level, the good and the bad, and something about these two are getting mixed up. Right? I'm reminding you the third Mishnah. The third Mishnah said there is good and bad. There is one that's supposed to be cursed and one that's supposed to be blessed, but I get confused which is which, and somehow that's the epitome of the happiness that underlies. Let's try to understand what that means. And I want to conclude now with two more thinkers, and I want to show how one is not what we're saying and the one how is what we are saying. What we're not saying, I'm going to bring a quote from Kierkegaard, the 19th century Danish religious philosopher. And then I'm going to bring Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. And they're not so far from each other, but the devil's in the details, if you will. And the nuance makes all the difference in the world. And I think here we can now understand what is the happiness of Purim, which is in some way higher than the happiness I've been describing until now. So again, if I summarize until now, we're allowed to acknowledge that there's a good and we're allowed to acknowledge that there's a bad, but happiness is some type of feeling we're supposed to have that underlies both of them. But then Purim is supposed to be some type of confusing of these two and a primarily existing on this lower plane. Okay, what does Johannes Clamicus say in the concluding unscientific postscript to the philosophical fragments? Johannes Clamicus is one of Kierkegaard's pseudonyms, but he requests that every book be quoted by the name of the pseudonym. So I am to thank God, says the pastor, and for what? As Christian, I'm told by my religious leader to thank God. Why? For what? For the good that God gives me. Excellent! That makes sense. But for what good? Presumably for the good that I discern is good. Stop! If I thank God for the good that I discern to be good, I'm making a fool of God. Because then my relationship with God means that I am transforming God in the likeness to me instead of me being transformed to the likeness of God. If I ultimately only thank God for the things I think are good, then I think I'm the ultimate arbiter of good and bad. That I'm the ultimate arbiter of reality. So if I only say thank you for the things I think are good, then what does that mean? That means that I'm basically saying that God says what's good is what I say is good. In Plato's Euthyphro, he asks the question, is it good because God said it's good, or does God say it's good because it's good? I'll say that again, slower. Is something good, and then God reveals to us that it's good, or it's good by definition of the fact that God says it's good? I'll let that sit there for a moment. So Kierkegaard, or rather Clamicus, is saying, what do you mean I'm supposed to thank God for the good? How do I define the good things for which I'm saying thank you? In the language of the Mishnah, how do I know what I'm supposed to say? Baruch HaTov Yametiv. For the things that I feel are good, I guess. So I thank God for the good that I know is good. But what I know is finite. So I'm basically thanking God for things that I am determining by my finite, broken understanding of the world to be good. But in my relationship with God, I'm specifically supposed to learn that I know nothing definitely. Therefore, I don't really know what's good. So I'm to thank God only for the good that I know is good, but it's something that I don't know. He's pointing out a cause. Don't tell me to say thank you for the good. Maybe you could tell me to say thank you, but you tell me to say thank you specifically for the good, but how do I know what's good? I naturally want to say thank you for the things that I think are good, but how can I so clearly trust that what I think is good is good? What then? So shall I omit giving thanks to God when that which happens to me is good according to my poor finite understanding? When something happens that I've ardently wished for, and which, now that I have received it, makes me feel so overwhelmed that I must of necessity thank God? So what? I prayed to get a job. I wanted the job so badly. I finally get the job. So now I'm not supposed to say thank you? Because I don't know if it's good? Because maybe I'm going to get that job and the boss is going to be terrible. That's going to caused huge problems in my life, and it's actually not a good thing that I got the job, but I think it's good. Because who knows what's good? Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. Maybe it got in the way of a different job I've been to get. Who knows? We don't know anything. But so what am I supposed to do? On the one hand, I can't say thank you for good because I don't know what's good. But on the other hand, I'm not supposed to say thank you for something I wanted, which I'm pretty sure is good, which I'm pretty sure is good. Well, so that quite can't be it. Okay. So consequently, with my giving thanks, I am to include an apology. I must shamefacedly admit that it looks so good to me that I must pray for forgiveness for giving thanks for it. Because I can't help it. Okay, so what's the resolution? Say thank you for what you think is good, but apologize for saying thank you, because you should only say thank you for something that's super good. You don't know if it's super good, infinitely good. So what's Haman saying here? He's saying, totally give up your understanding of what's good. Because you have no idea what's good. You have no idea what's good. You think it's good, it could be bad later. You think it's bad, it could be good later. We don't know what's good and we don't know what's bad. So I can recognize that I feel the need to say thank you for things that I think are good, but you have no idea. So how does he end? In my relationship with God, I must learn simply to give up my finite understanding and with the drawing of distinctions that is natural to me, in order always to be able in divine madness to give thanks. What does he say? Give up all distinctions of good and bad. Just be thankful. Just say thank you for everything that comes your way. The great things happen, say thank you. The bad things that happen, say thank you. And against the way I like to, I'm not going to bring examples because I don't want to bring any bad examples. But something you thought was good happens, great, thank you. Something you thought was bad happens, great, thank you. Right? It is clear to me that there is something about the happiness of Purim that is more extreme than the characters I quoted before, Nachum Ish Gamzu, and Rabbi Akiva's quote, and Pangloss. And the Mishnah between 3 and 5, right? There was something there that was about my ability to simultaneously say something's good, say something's bad, but be happy underneath, to exist on two planes at once, fine. Kierkegaard is saying something different here. Sorry, Climacus, what is he saying? He's saying, no, give up all... Wait, sorry. It is clear that Purim is something different than all of that. Purim needs to be ramping it up a notch. Adelo yada, until I don't know the difference between good and bad. So lichora, I could think, and it's close, but it's not the point, that what is being said, what Kierkegaard says, Climacus, sorry, which is, give up all distinctions of good and bad. I have no idea if it's good, and I have no idea if it's bad, and I just radically say thank you. So maybe that's what means my Purim, to get to this level of happiness where I don't have my good, and I don't have my bad, because I don't know what's good, and I don't know what's bad, so I'm just happy, so I'm just mad, and I give thanks, and I give up all distinctions that I have of reality. I have no idea what's good, I have no idea what's bad. I recognize that I am fabricating my own subjective story, and I got the job, but the person opposite me didn't get the job, so it's good for me, it's bad for them. Who knows what's good, who knows what's bad? I don't know anything. I made up, I constructed a whole reality, good, bad, Purim, throw it all out the door. Maybe that's what it could mean. Maybe what it could mean, although this is not what I think it means, maybe what it could mean is there's good and there's bad. No, there's not. Just be happy, because recognize that only on Purim, what is Purim saying when it's saying Ad lo yada? Maybe, I don't think this, maybe. What it could be saying is only exist at this level of happiness and throw out all conceptions of good and bad. The Mishnah said to exist on two dimensions, say good, say bad, and feel happy underneath. What is Purim? Just be happy underneath, and there is no higher dimension, just exist here. I think that's close, but I don't think that's what it's saying. So what do I think it's saying? And this will be our last source. Rabbi Nachman says in Likutei Halachot, which is a crazy place to find it, in Hilchot Tifrat Apayim, when he talks about Tachanun, when he talks about repentance, or the daily prayer of supplication or repent, whatever. He says, Zeu b'chinat ad lo yada ben aru Haman baruch Mordechai. Let me tell you what it means to get to a place of not knowing the difference between cursed be Haman and blessed be Mordechai. What's Purim? Hachnat zumat anachash shuat zevut b'chinat b'tzivun tochanuna. He takes us all the way back to original sin. The snake told us to eat from the tree. And what's the punishment? He looked at the words very literally. Be'itzvon tochanuna. It usually means like eat by your hard work, by your furrowed brow, by the sweat. But it has the word etzev. In your sadness you will eat. Let's go outside the text for a second. Let's go back to the story of original sin. We were told we could eat from any tree except one tree. What was that tree? The tree of knowledge of good and bad. Eitz hada'at tov vera. Eitz hada'at tov vera. What is Purim? Adelo yada. There is some inverse relationship or some contrasting relationship between eating from the tree of knowledge, Eitz hada'at tov vera, and adelo yada. When we ate from the tree of knowledge, we started to have our distinctions between good and bad, said Rabbi Nachman. And so if Purim is adelo yada, it's to get to a place of not knowing. It is to get to a place before the knowledge of good and bad. Maybe. I hope that contrast is clear. Eat from the tree of knowledge is what we did at the beginning. The knowledge of good and bad. Right? We've been all about good and bad the whole time here. Versus get to a place of not knowing. Not knowing what? That Haman is bad and Mordechai is good. Get to a place of being before the Eitz hada'at tov vera. Maybe, right? Because the Nachash made us sad. When we ate from the tree that the snake told us to eat from, we started to feel sad. Because sad is a function of our knowledge of good and bad. That maybe if we were to not have knowledge of good and bad, we could be happy, not sad. Okay. And we need to elevate our happiness, shenizkel al yedei simcha lasig or in sof. We need to be happy so we can get to a place of infinite light. Bechinat mateh v'lo mateh, a place of I grasp, I don't grasp. I grasp, I don't grasp, which is important imagery. We're going to get back to this. Shezeu bechinat tachlit hayediah asher lo neda. That the climax, the pinnacle, the epitome of knowledge is to not know. So it's not to go back to before eating of the tree and having knowledge. It's not saying before knowledge. It's saying after knowledge. The pinnacle of knowledge, the epitome of knowledge is to not know. To not know what? The distinction between good and bad. That's the epitome of knowledge. So it's not before you have the distinction, it's after you have the distinction, right? What does it mean to not know the difference between cursed be Haman and blessed be Mordechai? Not that there is no good and bad, but that you forget which one. Let's make this make more sense. You have to get drunk on Purim to be happy. Because wine has to do with happiness. That's what it means. Because the essence of our holding the notions of good and bad in the world, which is Haman and Mordechai, comes from having eaten from the tree of good and bad. Because what happens there's an infinite world where it's all one, where God is one. So how can God be all one and live in a world where there's me and there's you and there's distinctions and there's good and there's bad? It's a paradox that obviously can't be resolved. It's the paradox that underlies the deepest Torahs and philosophy that exist. How can you simultaneously have a world where all is one and have distinctions? How can you have a world where all is for good but there's good and bad? What's the answer? Or before, what's the answer? When we ate from the tree of knowledge, so goes the story, we stopped living in a world of all oneness and we got into a world of our knowledge, our distinctions, our fabricated world that we've constructed for ourselves. We got into a world where there is good and bad and where we see good and bad. That's what happens when we ate. And Purim is a simcha where you get to the epitome, happiness where you get to the epitome of knowledge, which is to no longer know. And because then what happens, and with this I'll try to close Rabbi Nachman and try to bring Tal together. Because the person who gets to this stage is able to know and not know at once. To know the distinction between good and bad and not know it. To live in a world with moral clarity and good and bad and to give up on it. Not what Kierkegaard said, which was to totally not have it. Because it's to not have it and to have it at the same time. So how do I have it and not have it at the same time? How do I get to the epitome of knowledge, which is to not know? What does it mean to know and not know at once? The answer is to know and then no longer know. The answer is to know and then no longer know. Had we never eaten from the tree, that's what Kierkegaard is saying. Had we never eaten from the tree, we'd never have distinction between good and bad. But our Mishnah valued the distinctions between good and bad. So there's good and there's bad, and most of the days of the year you call it good or you call it bad, but you have some happiness beneath it. But on Purim, you're supposed to only inhabit the happiness beneath it. But how do you only inhabit the happiness beneath it when you know there is good and you know that there's bad? Because you forget them. But to know them and forget them is not the same to have never known them. Our Torah deeply acknowledges that there is good and bad. So what is the happiness of Purim? The happiness of Purim is the ability to know that there is good and know that there is bad and then forget them. Not to delete them, not to ignore them, not to give up on them, but to forget them for a day. To for one day say, I know this is good and I know this is bad, but I'm not sure that I know what's right, so maybe my distinctions are wrong, so let's throw them in the air and forget them. And it's such a nuanced difference, but it makes all the difference in the world. Because you're not supposed to have never known them and you're not supposed to not have them in your life. We live our lives according to Torah, we live our lives according to halakha, we live our lives according to good and bad and right and wrong and moral clarity. But God is telling a story, and there are things that we think are bad are ultimately good, and things that we think are good are ultimately bad. That is v'nafochu, that is Purim. We thought it was bad what Haman was doing, but it all flipped upside down, and Mordechai ended up on top, and what's up is down, and down is up, and it's all extraordinarily confusing, but the Torah obviously recognizes and acknowledges that we need to live with our distinctions of good and bad. So for most of the year, you live with good, and you live with bad, and you say different blessings, but you find some deep happiness underneath them. And so for one day a year, you say, you know what, I want to forget my distinctions and just inhabit the happiness. I want to just be happy. I want to just be happy. I want to stop thinking all the time. I want to stop saying this is good and I want to stop saying this is bad. Because maybe what I think is good is bad and maybe what I think is bad is good. But if I really thought that what I think is good might be bad and what is bad might be good, then how can I even live my life? How can I live with moral clarity? How can I say yes to nobody? How can I fight somebody else? I'm not saying that it's a super postmodern and subjective. The word I'm looking for is relativistic. Because there's a problem. If I say I don't know what's good and what's bad, then I should live a life of relativism. But I'm not supposed to do that because I'm supposed to have my good and I'm supposed to have my bad. But on Purim, I forget them. There is a difference to say something and forget it than never to have known it at all. To ask the question and unask it is not the same as to have never asked it. I'm going to try to summarize and hopefully make the last point a bit more clear. We saw that Purim is the most important day of the year. Or rather, let's say that better. We saw that Purim is the one book besides the 5 books of Moses that's going to always be here. And we saw that Purim is the one holiday that will always be here. So that gives it some type of supremacy. And I'm positing that the supremacy has to do with happiness. Because the 9th chapter of Megilla talks about happiness all over the place. But it ties some relationship between happiness and a feast. So then I tried to do an exploration of what is happiness. And I think we more or less came up with something that is not connected to Purim, but which is how to live with the contrasting 3rd and 5th Mishnahs of the 9th chapter of Brachot. Which is that there are different blessings to say on the good and the bad, but also we're told to bless for the good and the bad in the same manner. The answer is to do them both happily. Out of Rav Steinsaltz, we saw you're supposed to sort of have 2 dimensions at the same time. You're supposed to have your reaction, have your sense of right and wrong, have your emotional reaction, have moral clarity, call something right and call something wrong, call something good and call something bad. But find a deep way to be tranquil like the heavens and know that God is telling the story. So to have a deep sense of internal quiet happiness that is not represented by laughing and dancing and jokes. But have a deep ability to say things are as they're meant to be while I simultaneously say that what's happening is bad. That's the happiness of all year round. But then what's the added happiness of Purim, the secret happiness that maybe one day we'll be able to inhabit for more than just one day, but for right now we inhabit for just one day and all of the month we get to that place? Again, for me the visual is helping. There's the good and the bad and the happiness underneath. It's clear that we're supposed to only be here on Purim. But not, as Kierkegaard might make us think, by a deletion of the distinctions, but by Rabbi Nachman says, by a forgetting of the distinctions. And a forgetting of the distinctions acknowledges that we know them and are forgetting them. We know them and are forgetting them. It's not that they don't exist. It's not that having lived in them was a mistake. We're supposed to, says the 3rd Mishnah, we're supposed to have our distinctions between good and bad. We're supposed to live in those distinctions. But for one day, forget them. For one day, allow that which drives me emotionally not to be the being here or the being here, but the being here. All of it one day will be for good, says Nachum Ish Gamzu, says Rabbi Akiva, and says Pangloss. There's differences, but we can't get into them. For one day, don't have that be some undercurrent thought of acceptance of reality as it is. For one day, find that to be the emotion that drives you. To be totally happy. But you can't be totally happy in a way that is naive, that denies that something, that there are bad things happening in the world. That would be to delete good and bad. But to forget it means it's there and you're forgetting it. It means you're knowing it and not knowing it at the same time. It means the epitome of your knowing it is to allow yourself to stop knowing it. To know it and not know it. And therefore, to let this dimension be that which guides you for one day a year, or maybe two, Purim, Yom Kippurim, can't go there now, back. For one day a year, to be in tremendous happiness, because I'm willing to forget my distinctions between good and bad. That is, I'm willing to know them and now not know them so that I can just be happy with the story that God is telling. There's up and there is down, but I forget which is which. Because maybe what I think is up is down, maybe what I think is down is up, and let's think it, let's remember it, let's forget it, and for one day, just look at the amazing world in which we live and be tremendously happy. I give you the blessing, and I hope you'll give me the blessing, that in this whole life we live, we'll live with moral clarity. We'll know there's right and there's wrong. We'll know that sometimes we get good news, sometimes we get bad news. But no matter what happens, we'll have an ability to be happy with it. But on Purim, that we let that happiness be the domain that overcomes us emotionally. Not by deleting good and bad, but by forgetting it. That is to not know it as the epitome of knowing it. To know it and no longer know it. To know it and not know it, and therefore be happy. Truly, joyfully, dancingly be happy. Purim Sameach.